please. Just make it quick," she said. But the cowboy lowered his gun and offered his hand instead. Jake was a cowboy, and the open land was his home. He had spent most of his life riding through the dry, dusty plains, working cattle and living a simple life. His clothes were worn, and his hat was weathered from the sun. His boots had seen hundreds of miles of dirt and stone, and his hands were calloused from years of hard work. He had learned to live without much, but what he had, he cherished.
A hard man, but not unkind.
He knew the land, and he knew how to survive. But even the toughest cowboys can be caught off guard, and today Jake would learn that sometimes life has a way of changing in a single moment. It was a quiet afternoon when Jake's horse, Dusty, trotted through the narrow trail that led across the flatlands. The sun hung high in the sky, casting a warm golden light over the barren ground. The sound of the hooves echoed off the distant hills as Jake guided Dusty along the well-worn path. His mind wandered as it often did, thinking about the ranch back home, the cattle he had to round up, and the little bit of peace he found when he was alone in the vast open land. But then something caught his eye. Far ahead, along the edge of the trail, Jake saw what looked like a figure sitting on the ground. He squinted his eyes, wondering who could be out here in the middle of nowhere. It was rare to see anyone this far from town, and even rarer to find someone alone. His instincts kicked in, and he slowed his horse, preparing himself for anything. As he got closer, he saw that the figure was a woman. She sat on the ground, her clothes torn and stained with dirt. Her long hair hung in disarray, and her face was pale and covered in grime. She looked like she had been out here for days. Her eyes, though, were the most striking thing about her. There was a look of fear in them, like someone who had seen too much and was now out of hope. She didn't seem to notice Jake approaching until he was only a few feet away. "Please!" The woman's voice broke through the still air. She looked up at him, and in that moment, Jake could see the desperation in her eyes, breaths. "Please, just make it quick," she said, her voice trembling. Jake's heart skipped a beat. For a moment, he couldn't move. He had heard plenty of things in his life. Desperate pleas, cries for help, but never anything quite like this. It didn't make sense. Why would she ask to be killed? What could have happened to her to make her feel this way? He had seen rough times before, but this woman, she was different. He knew something was wrong, but he wasn't sure what. He reached for the gun at his side instinctively. His fingers brushed the worn leather of the holster, but then he hesitated. The woman's eyes were pleading, her whole body trembling as if she was already preparing for what was to come. She wasn't threatening him. She wasn't reaching for a weapon of her own. She was simply broken. Jake studied her for a moment, his mind racing. He had no idea who she was, why she was out here, or what had brought her to this point. But something told him she wasn't a danger to him. This wasn't a typical encounter on the plains. This was different, around in dispensary. Jake had been around people his whole life, and he knew when someone was in real trouble. This was one of those times. "Ma'am," Jake said, his voice calm and steady as he slowly lowered his hand from his gun. The woman's eyes widened, and for a moment she looked at him as if she didn't believe him. Her lips quivered, and she took a shaky breath as if trying to decide whether to trust him or not.
"Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper.
Jake didn't answer immediately. He wasn't sure how to explain himself, but he could feel the weight of the moment hanging between them. Instead of speaking, he swung his leg over Dusty's saddle and slid off his horse. He approached the woman slowly, making sure she could see every movement. He wasn't sure what had brought her out here, but he was certain it wasn't good. Maybe she had run away from something, or maybe someone had left her to die. "Don't come any closer," the woman said suddenly, her voice shaky, but there was a sense of warning in it. She still looked at him like a trapped animal, ready to lash out if she had to. Jake stopped a few steps away, keeping his distance. "I'm not here to hurt you, I promise," he said gently. The woman's eyes flicked toward his horse, then back to Jake. She swallowed hard, the dry air harsh on her throat. "You're the first person to come by in days," she muttered, almost to herself. "I don't want to live like this anymore." Jake's heart clenched at her words. He had seen people in tough situations before, but there was something about the way she spoke, so defeated, that made him feel for her. He had been through hard times too, and he knew how lonely it could get in this land. But he had never thought that anyone would wish for death in such a way. "What happened to you?" Jake asked quietly, trying not to push her too much. The woman's gaze dropped to the ground, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of the world rested on them. She didn't answer him immediately, but Jake could tell the question had stirred something deep inside her. Her lips quivered as she spoke again, but this time there was anger mixed with her pain. People can be cruel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They take everything. You're nothing but a tool to them. I was just a means to an end, and now I'm here, all alone. Best. Left for dead." Jake could see the pain in her eyes now. It was raw and unfiltered. Whatever had happened to her, it had left scars deeper than any wound could leave. She had lost something precious, maybe her family, maybe her dignity, and now she had no more fight left in her. "Well, you're not alone anymore," Jake said, his voice firm but kind.
Breaths. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." The woman looked up at him then, her eyes filled with disbelief. She probably didn't believe him, couldn't trust that someone like him would want to help.
But Jake could see the flicker of hope in her eyes. It was small, but it was there. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why would you help me?" Jake didn't have a perfect answer, but he knew that sometimes people needed more than just survival. They needed someone who could show them that there was still goodness in the world. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. "I can't just leave you out here." After a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched out between them, heavy and thick with uncertainty. The woman still looked uncertain, but Jake could see that she was starting to believe him. Her grip on the edge of the ground loosened slightly, as if she was beginning to trust that she wasn't in danger. "Great." Jake extended his hand toward her slowly, palm open.
"Let me help you up." The woman stared at his hand for a moment, unsure.
She was probably wondering if he would pull it away, or worse, pull his gun. But Jake didn't move. He just waited. After what seemed like an eternity, the woman finally reached out and took his hand. Her grip was weak, but she held on tight as Jake helped her to her feet. She didn't speak right away, but when she did, it was just a whisper. "Thank you." Jake nodded, his heart heavy with the realization that this wasn't just a chance encounter. This was the beginning of something that could change both of their lives forever. Jake helped the woman to her feet, and for a moment neither of them said a word. She was still shaky, but she didn't pull away from his grasp. Jake could feel her hands tremble slightly as they gripped his, but it wasn't the kind of tremble from fear. It was a kind of exhaustion, the weariness of someone who had been running for too long and had seen too much. Breaths. She seemed to collapse into herself as if the weight of everything that had happened to her had just started to catch up. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, and Jake didn't rush to fill it. He just stood there, holding her hand for a moment longer, letting the silence settle.
He didn't know who she was or where she had come from, but he knew this wasn't the first time she had been let down by the world.
The hard, sun-bleached land didn't care about the people on it. It never did. But maybe, just maybe, he could offer her something different. After a long pause, the woman spoke. Her voice was quiet, and there was a rawness to it, like someone who had been crying for so long that there were no tears left. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do now," she said, her words hanging in the air. Breaths. "I can't keep running. There's no place left for me." Jake shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the vulnerability in her voice. But he didn't turn away. He couldn't. Breath. "You don't have to run anymore," he said softly. "I can help you. You're not alone." The woman looked up at him then, her eyes searching his face as if trying to figure out if he was telling the truth. Best. She had clearly seen enough deception to last a lifetime, and the idea of trusting anyone, especially a stranger in the middle of nowhere, must have seemed impossible to her. Jake could see the doubt in her eyes, but he didn't back down. He had seen people in desperate situations before, and he knew that trust didn't come easy, but sometimes it was the only thing left to offer. "I'm not going to hurt you," Jake added. "You're safe here. For now, you can rest. We'll figure out what to do next." The woman swallowed hard, but she didn't speak right away. Instead, she took a step back and wiped her brow, her hand shaking just a little as she did. Her movements were slow, hesitant, like she wasn't sure if she could believe what he was saying. She was still trying to process everything that had happened to her, still trapped in her fear and uncertainty, or trying to figure out the best thing to do next. There was no sign of any nearby town or settlement, just the endless stretch of land and the distant hills. He knew the place like the back of his hand, but this woman, this stranger, was a mystery to him. And yet, as much as he wanted to ask her more about what had brought her here, he could see that now wasn't the time. She needed rest. She needed to feel safe again, and he could provide that, at least for a little while. "You can sit on the horse if you want," Jake suggested, motioning toward Dusty, who was still standing a few feet away, patiently waiting. "It's a long ride, but we'll make it back to my place before dark." "I'll make sure you're taken care of." The woman hesitated. She looked at the horse, then back at Jake, as if weighing her options. She looked like she was about to speak again, but then her shoulders slumped, and she nodded. There was a quiet resignation in her movements, like she was too tired to fight anymore. Das. She was out of options, and Jake had offered her the only lifeline she had seen in days. Without a word, she made her way toward Dusty. Her legs were shaky, but she kept her balance as she climbed into the saddle. Jake stayed close behind her, making sure she didn't lose her grip, and once she was settled, he mounted his own horse and nudged Dusty forward. The ride was slow at first, the sound of the hooves echoing in the still air. The woman didn't say anything for the longest time, her eyes fixed on the path ahead. She seemed lost in thought, like she was processing everything that had happened to her, but Jake didn't rush her. He knew that sometimes silence was the best way to let someone heal, especially when they had been through so much. As they rode along, the land stretched out before them, endless and open, the colors of the desert shifting with the setting sun. The golden light bathed the plains, casting long shadows that made the land seem both beautiful and unforgiving at the same time. Jake was used to the solitude of the open range, but with the woman riding beside him, he couldn't help but feel the weight of her presence. There was something about her, a quiet strength, a determination that had kept her going, even when it seemed like the world was against her. It wasn't until they had been riding for a while that the woman spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you help me?" she asked, her words catching in the wind. "Why didn't you just leave me like everyone else?"
Jake didn't have an immediate answer.
Bass. He wasn't sure why he had done it. Maybe it was because he couldn't stand to see someone in so much pain. Or maybe it was because he understood what it was like to be alone. The desert could swallow you up in an instant, and sometimes you needed someone to reach out and pull you back from the edge. "I guess I just couldn't leave you out here," Jake said after a pause. "I've seen people in bad situations before, and sometimes you just need someone to show up." The woman was quiet for a long time after that, her head turned slightly to look at him. Jake could feel the weight of her gaze, but he didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the trail ahead, focusing on guiding Dusty through the rocky path. "I don't know what I would have done without you," she said finally, her voice quiet, but there was a softness to it now. She wasn't asking for anything more, but Jake could hear the gratitude in her words. She wasn't used to people helping her, and it was clear that she wasn't sure how to accept the kindness that Jake had shown her.
You'll be all right, Jake said simply, not knowing exactly what else to say.
"We'll figure it out. One step at a time." Then they rode in silence for a while longer, the sound of the hooves and the wind the only noise breaking the peace of the desert. Brask. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the land, Jake couldn't help but feel that this moment, this chance encounter, had changed something inside him. He wasn't sure what the future held for the woman beside him, or what had brought her to this place, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was doing something that mattered. The landscape began to shift as they neared the outskirts of Jake's ranch. The hills loomed ahead, and the smell of fresh earth and grass started to fill the air. It wasn't much, just a small plot of land with a couple of cattle and a modest cabin. But it was home. And for the woman beside him, it might just be the refuge she needed to start over. As they neared the ranch, Jake's thoughts turned to what would come next. He couldn't pretend to know everything about her, but he knew that for now she had found a safe place. And for Jake, that was enough. The ride was long, but the sun was setting, casting the whole land in a soft orange glow as they made their way toward Jake's ranch. The woman, still perched awkwardly on the back of Dusty, tried to adjust herself, though she was clearly still weak from the long days she had spent alone on the trail.
It was clear that she wasn't used to being in this position, being taken care of.
She had the look of someone who had relied on no one but herself for far too long. But slowly, bit by bit, Jake could sense the tension in her shoulders begin to ease, just a little, as she realized that she was no longer alone. Jake rode in silence beside her, glancing at her from time to time, though he didn't press her for answers. He could tell she was still processing everything that had happened. There was a distant, far-off look in her eyes, as if she was seeing something that was far beyond the vast desert before them. Jake had learned that sometimes the mind needed time to catch up with the body, to process the things that couldn't be put into words. And today, this woman had seen too much to simply forget. She wasn't just physically tired, she was emotionally drained, carrying a burden that was heavier than anything Jake could see. The land around them started to change as they neared the ranch. The wide, open plains that stretched for miles gave way to the smaller, more familiar hills near Jake's land. The golden light of the setting sun made the earth beneath them look rich and welcoming. Jake felt a small sense of pride. This was his home, the place where he could find peace. The thought of offering some of that peace to the woman beside him felt right, even though he didn't fully understand why she was in such distress. As they reached the edge of his ranch, Jake could see the outline of his cabin in the distance. It wasn't much, just a small structure with a couple of simple rooms, a roof that had seen better days, and a front porch where he often sat with a cup of coffee in the mornings. It was a modest place, but it was his, and it was all he needed. It wasn't much for a woman who had likely come from more than he could imagine, but for now, it would be enough.
"We're almost there," Jake said softly, more to break the silence than anything else.
The woman didn't respond at first, but he could feel her awareness shifting as she took in the sight of the cabin. She seemed to pull herself together, as if the prospect of reaching shelter was giving her the strength to keep going. Breaths. When they arrived, Jake dismounted first, his boots hitting the ground with a familiar thud. He turned to help the woman down from the horse. She hesitated for a moment before sliding off Dusty's back, her legs still a little wobbly, but she managed to steady herself. Jake offered her a hand, but this time she didn't hesitate to take it. It was small, but it was progress. The sun had nearly set by the time they reached the porch. The light was fading, but the evening air was warm and welcoming, free from the harsh heat of the midday sun. Jake led her inside the cabin where the warmth of the fire from the stove greeted them. The scent of wood smoke and the soft crackling of the fire filled the space, making it feel even more like home. The woman looked around, her eyes scanning the simple furnishings. There wasn't much, just a small table, a couple of chairs, a bed, and a few shelves stocked with essentials. But it was a safe place. "Sit down," Jake said, motioning to the chair by the fire. The woman sat down slowly, still uncertain of everything around her. But there was something calming about the space, round in desperation. He let out a quiet sigh as she sat, clearly exhausted.
Jake went to the small stove and began to prepare a simple meal, something he could whip up easily.
He didn't speak much while he worked, but he could feel the woman's gaze on him, even though she didn't say anything. As he set a small plate of food in front of her, he noticed how thin she was. She picked at the food a little, not eating much, but she still made an effort to take small bites. Jake didn't push her to eat. He knew that sometimes people needed time, and it wasn't his place to hurry her along, Brett. For now he just sat across from her, watching the fire flicker in the hearth and the shadows dance on the walls. The silence was comfortable, almost peaceful, though it was clear that the woman was still carrying some kind of weight that she hadn't shared yet. Jake didn't rush her. He'd learned over the years that sometimes when a person had been through something painful, all they needed was time to feel safe again. After a while, the woman set the plate aside, her appetite clearly gone. She shifted in her chair, then looked at Jake, her expression thoughtful. "I don't know how to thank you for this," she said quietly, her voice still tinged with that rawness, but it had a softer edge now.
You didn't have to help me.
"You didn't even know me." Jake glanced at her, his brow furrowing slightly. He could see that she was struggling with the idea of accepting his help, as if it was a weakness to rely on someone else. He'd seen it before in others, people who had been pushed so far that they couldn't bring themselves to ask for help. They'd learned to survive on their own, even if it meant hurting themselves in the process. "You don't have to thank me," Jake said, his voice steady and calm. "It's just what you do when you see someone who needs help. You don't leave them out there to suffer."
That's all there is to it. The woman looked at him for a long time, her eyes searching, as if trying to understand something about him.
"Why did you help me?" she asked again, her voice a little stronger now. "You don't even know what I've done, what I've been through."
Jake sighed and stood up, walking over to the small window where he could see the last of the daylight fading.
"I don't need to know what you've done," he said, his voice quieter now. "Sometimes people just need someone to show them that they're not alone." "Psst. You're here, and that's enough for me." The woman was silent for a long time, but Jake didn't mind the quiet. It was a comfortable kind of silence, one that didn't feel forced. Finally she spoke again, her voice softer now, like she was letting down some of the walls she had built around herself.
"You don't know what it's like to feel like you don't matter," she said, her voice barely above a whisper.
To have everyone turn their back on you, to be left behind, like you're nothing. Jake turned back toward her then, his face softening. He understood more than she knew. The world could be a cold place, and sometimes people found themselves on the wrong side of it no matter how hard they tried. He had been there once, a long time ago, when he felt like there was nothing left for him in the world. But over time he had learned that things could change, that the hard times didn't have to define you forever. "I get it," Jake said quietly, his voice low and steady, "but you matter to someone. You matter to me." The woman looked at him, and this time there was no doubt in her eyes. She had heard him, and she believed him. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was the beginning of something new. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to believe that there was hope. Jake stepped over to the small table and sat across from her, the two of them sitting quietly together, the fire crackling softly between them. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was a peaceful silence, the kind that only comes when two people understand each other without words. It was a moment of peace in a world that often felt too harsh, a brief respite from the storms that life could throw at you. And for the woman sitting across from him, it was the first time in a long time that she felt safe enough to let her guard down. Jake knew it wasn't going to be easy, but he was willing to help her take the first steps toward healing. One step at a time. The days that followed were quiet ones, but they were filled with small moments of healing. The woman, whose name Jake had yet to learn, began to settle into the routine of the ranch operation. She helped with the small tasks around the cabin, though at first she moved slowly, as if unsure of her place. Jake didn't push her. He let her take things at her own pace, and in time she began to open up, bit by bit. Every now and then, when she thought Jake wasn't paying attention, he would catch her looking around the cabin, taking in the simple surroundings with a strange sense of wonder. She had been used to much less peace in her life, and here, the stillness of the land seemed to fill the empty spaces within her breaths. Each evening they would sit by the fire, Jake telling quiet stories about his life on the ranch, about the animals, and about the days when he was just starting out. The woman would listen, and sometimes she would smile faintly, a soft light in her eyes that Jake had come to treasure. It wasn't much, but it was a start. But she wasn't ready to speak of her past, and Jake never pressed her for details. He could see the scars in her eyes, the pain that ran deep, and he understood that some things needed time to heal before they could be shared. One morning, about a week after she had arrived, the woman woke early, long before the sun had fully risen. Jake was already up, tending to the horses, and she could hear the familiar sounds of him preparing for the day. The quiet morning air was cool, and there was a sense of calm in the world before the heat of the day would settle in. The woman stood up slowly, stretching her stiff limbs, and walked outside, the cool breeze brushing against her face. She looked toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning to peek over the distant hills. It was a beautiful sight, one that she had almost forgotten could exist. She had spent so much time running, so much time on the edge of fear, that she had forgotten what peace felt like. But here, in this quiet corner of the world, peace seemed possible. Jake noticed her standing at the edge of the porch, staring out at the morning. He didn't interrupt her. Instead, he took his time with the horses, giving her the space she needed. He had learned that the silence between them didn't have to be uncomfortable. Sometimes, the most healing moments were the ones shared in quiet understanding, when words weren't needed. After a while, he walked over to where she stood, standing beside her but not too close, letting her have the moment to herself. "You look like you're thinking about something," Jake said, his voice gentle. The woman turned her head slightly, glancing at him. "I was just thinking about how everything seems so different here," she said softly. "It's peaceful." "I haven't felt like this in a long time." Jake smiled, though it was a quiet smile, the kind that spoke of understanding. This place can do that to a person, he said, his voice carrying the same calm tone that had become a part of him over the years. It's a different kind of life, but sometimes that's exactly what people need. She nodded, her eyes turning back to the horizon. Maybe I'm finally ready to find out what kind of life that is, she whispered, as if the idea was just beginning to form in her mind. Maybe I can start again.
Maybe I can leave the past behind. Jake didn't say anything for a moment, giving her time to process her own words.
For starting over's never easy, he said eventually, his voice low. But it's not impossible. Every day's a new chance.
For the first time since she had arrived, the woman let herself smile, though it was small and tentative. Maybe, she said, her voice full of the quiet hope that she had been holding back for so long.
Maybe I can try. The next few days were full of small victories for the woman. She started helping Jake more, cleaning the cabin, making meals, and even tending to the animals when Jake was busy with other work. She worked quietly, but there was a new sense of purpose in her movements. It wasn't much, but it was enough to show Jake that she was beginning to build something new for herself, something that had been lost to her for far too long. One afternoon, as Jake was sitting by the small wooden fence watching the cattle graze in the distance, the woman approached him with a hesitant look in her eyes. She had something in her hands, a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She stopped a few feet away from him and held it out. "What's this?" Jake asked, curious but not wanting to push her. The woman looked down at the bundle, as if unsure of how to explain it. "I thought you might like this," she said softly, almost shy. "It's a gift. I don't have much, but I wanted to do something for you." Break. Jake smiled and took the bundle gently, his hands brushing against hers as he did. "You don't have to give me anything," he said, but she shook her head, a soft look in her eyes. "No, I want to. You've done so much for me, more than I can ever repay. This is the least I can do." Jake unwrapped the cloth carefully, revealing a small wooden carving. It was simple, but it was clear that it had been carefully crafted, each line of the wood smoothed and shaped with care. The carving was of a horse, its legs strong and poised, its body full of grace. That it wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful in its own way, and it reminded Jake of the horses he had known all his life. He looked up at the woman, his eyes soft. "It's perfect," he said simply. "Thank you." For a moment the woman looked as if she might say something more, but instead she just nodded. There was a quiet understanding between them. Something that didn't need words. They didn't need to explain themselves to each other. They both understood what the other had been through. The carving wasn't just a piece of wood. It was a symbol of the trust that had begun to form between them, the bond that was slowly taking root. As the days went on, Jake noticed more changes in the woman. She began to laugh more, a soft, hesitant sound at first, but it grew louder as she started to feel more at home. She had started talking about her past, piece by piece, though she never spoke of the darkest parts of it. And Jake never asked her to. He could tell that there were things she needed to keep for herself, and he respected that. The land around them, once so vast and empty, now seemed full of potential. The days became longer, the sky clearer, and the work on the ranch easier with two people working together. Even though they hadn't spoken about it directly, it was clear that this small corner of the world had started to heal them both. It wasn't perfect, and there were still challenges ahead. But Jake knew that they were on the right path. One evening, as they sat on the porch together, watching the sun set behind the hills, the woman turned to Jake, a soft smile on her lips.
"I never thought I'd be here," she said, her voice full of quiet wonder. "I never thought I'd be safe again." Jake looked at her, his heart warming.
"You're safe here," he said firmly. "And you always will be." She looked out at the land, her eyes filled with a quiet strength. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't know I needed this, but I'm starting to think that maybe I was always meant to find it." It didn't need to. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with understanding and unspoken promises. In that moment, both of them knew that no matter what the future held, they had found something worth holding on to. It wasn't about running away from the past anymore. It was about finding peace in the present and building a future together. The weeks passed by, and Jake could sense the change in the woman. Her name was now Sarah, though she still hesitated to speak it aloud sometimes.
But Jake didn't press her on it. She had begun to settle into the rhythm of the ranch life, helping with the daily chores, tending to the animals, and even finding moments of joy in small things like the changing seasons and the quiet mornings.
The sense of peace that had slowly settled between them grew stronger each day. She still had moments of silence, moments when her eyes would wander off to places far away, but these were becoming fewer. It was as though the weight of her past was gradually lifting, piece by piece. Jake was always patient with her, never pushing too hard. He knew that healing wasn't something that happened overnight. It took time, and he could see that Sarah was making progress. But it wasn't just about the work they did on the ranch. It was about the connection that was growing between them. It was about the trust that was slowly building step by step. One cool morning as the sun began to rise, Jake was out in the field checking on the cattle when he noticed Sarah walking toward him. She had a different look in her eyes today. There was a quiet confidence in her steps, a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. Jake paused, watching her for a moment. And when she reached him, she stood still for a moment, her hands clasped in front of her. "I need to talk to you," she said softly. But there was a firmness in her voice that caught Jake's attention. Breaths. "I've been thinking about everything." Jake gave her a reassuring smile, leaning on the wooden fence as he listened. "You don't need to say anything if you're not ready," he said gently. "But if you do, I'm here." Breath. Sarah nodded, taking a deep breath as she looked out at the land before them.
It was vast and open, just like the future she was starting to see more clearly now.
"I know I've been quiet about my past," she began, her voice steady but tinged with a quiet sadness. "I know I've kept a lot of things inside, things that have made it hard for me to move forward. But I've been thinking, maybe it's time to let go of all that. I've been running for so long, and I'm tired."
I don't want to keep running anymore.
He simply nodded, knowing that she wasn't just talking about the miles she had traveled physically, but about the emotional distance she had kept from herself and from others. Brand. She had been through things no one should have to endure, and it made sense that she had built walls around her heart. But now here she was, standing before him with the courage to face those walls and let them fall down. It was a huge step, one that he knew would take time to fully process.
I'm here for you, Sarah, Jake said quietly, his voice full of sincerity.
Whatever you need, however long it takes, you're not alone anymore. Sarah smiled, the first real smile Jake had seen from her in weeks. It was small, but it held so much promise. Rasp. She looked out over the field again, the light of the rising sun glinting off the distant hills.
"I never thought I'd find a place like this," she said, her voice soft but full of hope.
I thought I had nothing left, but now I think I'm starting to believe that I can have a future. A real one.
Jake's heart swelled with quiet pride. He had seen this moment coming, in his own way.
He had always known that Sarah had the strength inside her to move forward, but he also knew that strength came with time and support.
He had been that support.
giving her the space she needed to heal without ever forcing her to face things she wasn't ready for.
Breath. And now, seeing her standing here with a newfound sense of purpose, Jake realized just how much their time together had changed both of them.
You're stronger than you think, Jake said gently, his voice full of quiet admiration.
And you've already started building something new here. A life. A future. It's not perfect, but it's yours. Breaths. And that's all anyone can ask for. Sarah met his gaze, and this time there was no doubt in her eyes. I think I'm ready for that, she said, her voice steady and filled with a sense of resolve. I think I'm ready to make something of myself.
I'm ready to be who I was always meant to be. Jake smiled at her, proud of the woman she was becoming.
You already are, he said simply, his words carrying the weight of everything they had shared. You're exactly where you need to be. As the days went by, things began to settle into a routine. Jake continued his work on the ranch, tending to the cattle and the land, but now he had someone by his side. Sarah worked alongside him, taking on more responsibilities, learning how to manage the ranch in her own way. She had always been a hard worker, but now she had the confidence to take on challenges with the strength of someone who had found peace. There were still tough days, of course. Days when the shadows of the past seemed to creep back into her mind. But Jake was always there, a steady presence, helping her through the difficult moments without judgment. He had learned that sometimes the best thing you could do for someone was simply to be there when they needed you, without asking for anything in return. And that's exactly what he did. Bays. One evening as they sat together on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Sarah turned to Jake.
I've been thinking, she said, her voice thoughtful,
about what comes next, what I want to do with my life.
Jake looked at her, his gaze warm and supportive.
But what do you want to do?
Sarah smiled, a small but confident smile that reached her eyes. I want to help others.
I want to make sure no one has to go through what I did. I want to give people the same chance you gave me.
Jake's heart lifted at her words. He had known from the beginning that Sarah had a kind heart, a heart that had been hidden beneath layers of pain and fear, and now he could see that she was ready to share that heart with the world. She was ready to help others, to give them the same hope and support she had found in herself.
You'll do great, Jake said simply. You've got the strength, and you've got the heart.
You just needed to believe in yourself. You just needed to believe in yourself at the land, the soft light of dusk settling over the fields. I'm not sure where this journey will take me, she said softly. But for the first time in a long time, I'm not afraid to take the first step. Jake nodded, understanding completely. The future was uncertain, but that was what made it so full of possibilities. And with Sarah by his side, Jake knew that no matter what came next, they would face it together. The silence between them was comfortable now, filled with the kind of understanding that only comes when two people truly see each other, when they've shared enough to know that they are no longer alone. And as the stars began to twinkle in the sky above, Jake knew that their journey together had only just begun.